Director Sethy?
Here.
Akbari?
Present.
Gunther?
Here.
Huang? Here. And Weed?
Here. Dr. Akbari, please lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we have public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board on an item which is not on our agenda tonight? There being none, we will then move to the consent calendar. Is there anyone who wishes to amend the consent calendar?
Mr. President, I'd like to add items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4 to the consent calendar.
Second.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang? Aye. And Weed?
Aye. We have a motion for approval of the consent calendar as amended.
I'll move the approval as amended.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang? Aye. And Weed?
I'd like to adjust the calendar a bit at this point and move to an item which is a staff report on the district's participation in the emergency response and recovery efforts with Napa-Sonoma fires.
Yes, thank you, President Weed. This is item 6.3.1 on the board agenda, and we're very pleased to have our staff return safely from Napa and Sonoma. And Mr. Peterson, our operations and maintenance manager, will provide some opening remarks, and then we'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. And before I turn things over to Jake and Dan, I would like to express my sincere appreciation on the contributions that they made in the emergency response effort to help the people of Sonoma County affected by the Sonoma Complex fires. A firestorm began on Sunday night on October 8 and burned more than 111,000 acres across Sonoma County. Over 7,200 structures were damaged or destroyed, and 23 lives were lost in Sonoma County alone. I also want to mention that Jake and Dan will be making references to the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, the State Emergency Management System, known as SIMS, and the Incident Command System, or ICS. The subject of NIMS, SIMS, and ICS will not be covered in tonight's presentation in any detail. Rather, at a future board meeting or workshop, Jake will be making a presentation about NIMS, SIMS, and ICS, and the roles that board members will have following a major disaster. Finally, I want to share with you some remarks made on 2 emergency management mutual aid individual performance evaluations on Jake and Dan, and I have them here. Let's see, the first one things that they were evaluated on included such things as knowledge of the job, ability to obtain performance, I'm assuming performance from others, attitude, decisions under stress, initiative, and several other factors. So in looking at Jake's, he received the highest marks in all categories. And there's some personal remarks that read, Jacob brought a calm, experienced leadership style in order to the chaos of our EOC response. He made a huge difference in our logistics operation, setup of our commodity points of distribution, and trying to read the handwriting here, and established a debriefing plan. And this was signed by the lead logistics chief, Carolyn Judy. Then I have a similar performance evaluation form for Dan Stevenson. He received a similar rating, the highest for all those categories that I mentioned earlier. And then from the logistics chief, there were because it's a 24/7 operation, and Jake and Dan will explain this further. But from the logistics chief that Dan answered to, the remarks read, highly competent and motivated, providing support as needed in several areas of logistics, including transportation, community points of distribution deployment, and I'm sorry.
Redeployment.
Deployment. It's hard to read the handwriting. Deployment assistance. So I just wanted to share with you an independent third-party assessment of our two representatives that did a fine job of representing the district in this response. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Jake and Dan.
Thanks, Steve, and I'll tell you, as I told the lady that wrote this compliment, it's hard for me to take compliments, but it was definitely a great effort. The real heroes out there are the firemen and the PD that respond to mutual aid. Dan and I were first responders, but it was in a support role, and it felt really good to be able to have an effect on that support. It was a great experience. So we hope to share some of our experiences with the elected members, executive staff, and the public tonight. We'll start with the chronology of events here. I thought it was only appropriate to get started to show two things regarding mutual assistance. One, it takes a lot of work. Half of my fight was just being able to help out. That took a lot of work behind the scenes. And two, I thought I'd go over the mutual assistance system just so everyone here that supported it know what the system was that enabled everyone here to support our employees going forward. So the Emergency Management Mutual Assistance System is a system that is ran by California Office of Emergency Services. So I think as a water utility, we're used to, Cal warning requests, which are more water utility specific requests, but in this particular disaster, being that we are a special district, we also get requests from one government agency to another. And that's essentially what EMA is. It's the affected area, in this particular area, Sonoma County operational area, determined they need more resources, in this case people. They told Cal OES, these are the people we need. Cal OES reached down to the unaffected operational areas or counties and said, hey, can you guys provide people? That's essentially how the process works. I thought it was important just to show a snapshot of how this comes through. It comes through mainly in the email form. Also comes through in phone calls, but mainly in the email form. And when Sonoma County sent up that request to Cal OES, I happened to already be activated as a National Guardsman in the State Operations Center, and I was monitoring my water district emails and also still participating in the Cal Warren and CUA conference calls because I kind of felt like this is so big, there's going to be requests coming out to everybody in California. And sure enough, on a Saturday, as you see, it's highlighted in red and the numbers are in the hundreds. They need a lot of people. So, after working with the general manager, executive staff, to identify if we could provide hydrologists, geologists, logisticians, just volunteers. After we staffed that and figured out what we can help or how we could provide help, on a Sunday, it was like 10 at night, I was able to call Alameda County's Office of Emergency Services Supervisor and said, hey, I hit send. Is it going to go all the way? So fortunately, he picked up my call and he made it happen. And then sure enough, the request dropped on a Monday, and Dan and I were called because the logistics was where they were really hurting for everything. This screen here is just a picture of, I bring up another picture of this email just to show that, one, we'll see this in the future when we're asked to provide mutual assistance, but also I've got to get somebody trained on making these particular requests. And what this request for personnel simply asks for is, what do you bring from your water district? And then that last line there is, what's your training in ICF Sims and IMS, and how many times you've been deployed before? And you know, it's up to the people making the request, the requester, to take in all of those applications and triage them and determine who brings the most to the fight. So with that said, that's what got us there, and then it's only appropriate to talk about the actual deployment to there and the reception at the Sonoma County Emergency Operations Center.
Thanks, Jake. So as Jake mentioned, he was deployed in Sacramento when the request came through. So I was here. I showed up to work on Monday, and I got a phone call about noon saying, "Hey, can you come down? We need you in the logistics center." I said, "Yeah, I can do it. I'm available." As I submitted, and I said, "When do you want me?" And they said, "Well, as soon as we can get you." And I said, "Well, let me take care of some things here at work. Let me go home and pack. Let me do that." So I drove up that evening. I got up there about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and you know, we were talking about some of the, or on here we want to talk about some of the challenges of just getting up there and kind of seeing the organized chaos. You had armed guards, different, you know, the National Guard was there guarding the place. So I finally get in, and they bring me over to the table where the lady is, and she says, "Well, what's your name?" She looks at the paperwork, and she says, "Well, I don't have you shown as accepting." She said, "Who'd you come here with?" And I said, "Well, I've got Jacob Reed coming in the morning." "Well, I show him as accepting." She said, "Would you be terribly upset if we sent you home?" And I said, "Well, I went through a lot of things to, you know, I had to do a lot of, you know, organizing and get a lot of things to get here." I said, "Yeah, it would be, you know," and so luckily the person in charge overheard, and he came out and he said, no, we're not sending anybody home. We need as many people as we can get." So he pulled me in his office and he said, "What's your background? What do you bring to the table?" Told him, you know, I work for the water district, and told him what I do here. And one of the things I mentioned was that I manage the fleet. And he said, "Well, tell me more about that." And I said, "Well, I started my career as an auto mechanic for the city of Hayward, and you know, so and I've worked my way up, and I've managed the fleet now." And he said, "Well, great. He said, I'm the fleet manager for the county, and he said, what I need is we've got mechanics doing actual manning the desk, doing administrative work." He said, "I need them on the floor. We're running 24/7 operations. We've got, you know, all the other mutual aid vehicles that are out here." And he said, "Air filters, cabin filters, tires, we're just, you know, I need them where I can get them." So, when he asked me if I'd be willing to man that desk, I said, "Absolutely." I said, "Wherever you think I'm going to fit and provide the best assistance."
And so you can tell there's just a little bit of chaos there when we show up, rightfully and understandably so. And the takeaway for me is going forward when we invite people or we send people other places or we deal with our own disaster is that the mindset of the employees that we have to send forward is that just let them know, hey, when you're going, you're bringing something. They may not know it. They may not even think you're supposed to be there. But it's incumbent on you to have that mindset that to meet those that are in charge and tell them that you'll be part of the team and find out where you get help. So it's a big part of it. Okay, so I thought it was good to take a break and talk about the disaster to show, one, what we drove into, and two, to show why the EOC exists, was to support the result of the fire. So this particular fire was, well, I think it'll officially be at one point the worst fire in the state's history, right? And so this is a map from CAL FIRE produced, and what it shows, and I couldn't fit it all on one slide, is the structures that were damaged by fire. So if you look here where my pointer, most people are looking this way. If you look here, you'll see the city of Santa Rosa. And the big takeaways from here, just to try to paint a picture of the destruction, is that everything north, a lot north of the city of Santa Rosa was destroyed. A lot of areas east and southeast. And from what I was told when I was there, this particular area, to paint a picture again, it's called Coffee Park, and it's been famous, right? Because many people can relate to Coffee Park because it looks like, for most blue-collar people, that home you grew up in. That little suburban home, tree-lined street, everybody knows everybody. So this fire started on a Sunday night up here. This particular one's a Tubbs fire. And the winds were constant at 70 miles per hour for multiple hours, and the gusts were much more faster than that. And from what I was told, that on Sunday night, it only took approximately 45 minutes from the start of the fire up on this huge mountain ridge in the Sonoma Valley East, moving southwest in the burned down coffee park. So that is the gravity of what they call a fire storm. It was something people have never seen before, and it was very quick, very deadly, very destructive. And quite frankly, when I drove through a few of these towns, I hadn't seen that kind of destruction since Baghdad. To me, same as the MLRS, or around the town, except for things that can't burn were still standing. It was quite the destructive fire. This picture here kind of breaks down the fire. The fire had 21 evacuated zones. So those 21 evacuated zones then became hazardous zones. And you can't just let people back into these zones. So a big part of when we got there in the EOC was, now that these zones are evacuated, how do we repopulate them so people could see if they have anything that was left behind? And that was huge. And you'll see why they call it hazardous was because you see these, if you can see there's vehicles here. Get back over here. These vehicles and whatnot, and probably some refrigerators and other devices left a lot of chemical waste. And then these trees that are half burned are now hazardous because they fall down on somebody or a house. And then there's utilities that aren't functioning as designed everywhere. There's a power line that was laying in the road, or gas lines are open. So there's 21 of these zones. And here's how our rules came in.
So, as I mentioned, I met with the logistics chief the night that I got there, so I assumed the role of transportation unit leader. I worked there for 11 days, so the first week and a half I was there, that was my role. And really what that consisted of was me sitting behind a desk, so as a transportation unit leader, I was coordinating people and stuff getting places. So we had a warehouse, or the county had a warehouse, and I was kind of the de facto, we had a procurement department, but anything that we had housed in the warehouse, I was also sending out, so that would include cots, generators, anything we didn't rent that we provided. So I would coordinate that stuff moving around, coordinate buses and shuttles, things I had no idea that I've never done before, moving people that were bedridden, animals. We actually had to coordinate to get I had to get a 100-gallon tank because somebody had their $100,000 koi fish that needed to be moved, so the animal department did that. So there's a lot of interesting, weird nuances that occurred that I got thrust right in the middle of. When I assumed the post, I think I mentioned there was 2 people that were doing the job. I was able to do it by myself, so that was a success. But and I didn't do it alone. I had some resources I could call upon people. So, but that allowed those people to go back out to work and do the important work that they needed to do. The last 3 days I was there, I worked on the resource recovery team, which was kind of cool because I actually got to get out and see some of this stuff, because 11 days behind a desk, they were 12.5-hour days. I went there, it was dark, and when I left, it was dark. So it was, so Jake had kind of more of the frontline experience, I think, than I did.
Yeah. That's why it's called a team, right? I just hope some of my decisions didn't affect yours in a negative way. My particular assignments, they ranged, but they started out as, when I first got there and I talked to the logistics section chief, they said, okay, well actually, let me back up just a bit. I met somebody that I've known through training. His name's Ken. He works for the City of South San Francisco Fire, and he introduced me and Dan to the logistics section chief at the time, Caroline. I actually know as Gene. And the short of it is, hey, these guys could probably help, right? And overstating some things, actually. So Gene said, great, you could be the logistics section chief tomorrow night, because it's a 12-hour rotation. It changed every 12 hours. And I was like, ooh, let's hit the brakes. Because, you get full signature authority. You got to talk to the director, who's the county administrator, and all that. So I was like, ooh, can I just shadow you for a shift? So needless to say, I shadowed Gene for a shift, got the feel of everything, what the operations were. Very capable person, experienced, smart, and just a really good person, you could tell. And it was nice to be able to help out because I could take an outsider's view, take a step back and see how we'd accomplish more, a little bit more efficiently. And it was a good experience. So needless to say, the next night I was on as logistics section chief, which was a great experience. And then this huge heavy lift operation came up prior to, during that night, and then the next day, which was the county wanted to repopulate those 21 affected areas, and a big part of that repopulation effort was going to fall on the logistics section to provide commodity points of distribution, which is essentially just a logistical supply point. So some quick experiences, because I don't want to sit up here and tell war stories all night. The commodity point of distribution was a heck of a event. The plan was, with these 21 affected areas, we'll let people in, right? But they have to go, and there has to be an ingress, one way in, and they have to be verified by local law enforcement if they do live in the area, which is a challenge in itself, right? Because half the people left with nothing but the clothes on their back. So somehow local law enforcement had the idea interview these people. Can only imagine being in their shoes and trying to interview a victim of a fire and ask them why they don't have ID, and then try to see if they live in the house they need to go to. Law enforcement had to play that role. Once people were cleared to go back to their land or their home, they came to the commodity point of distribution to get essentially educational papers and personal protective equipment that they could have, and water, and also there was like mental health resources available as well, so they can take that step before they go into the ashes and start sifting through their stuff to see what they have left. I've learned a ton from that experience, because as Dan said, I was out in the field, and I like getting my hands dirty, so that was great. But my experiences were all over the spectrum, and the big takeaways were, for me, when you respond or people respond to you, is don't take something personally. People are clearly going through a lot of physical stress, a lot of psychological stress, and a lot of also political stress. And it showed in many forms. And so being from the outside and having some experience with these emergencies before, sometimes it felt like the rounds kept coming, but you got to put yourself in people's shoes, which is it can be tricky. One example will be my biggest CPOD in Kaiser. We just set it up. We got in a routine. We set up this distribution point. We had all these people here, mutual assistance, the National Guard, volunteers, and these deputies drive up. I walk over to them. I want to see, okay, where's their checkpoint going to be today, where they allow people to come to our CPOD. And I go up to this one deputy, and hey, how's it going? Just started, made sure he had the passes, because we had the passes they were given to local citizens to get back in their neighborhoods. I was like, hey, do you have these passes? Yeah, I got them. Like, all right, sir. You guys could do your checkpoint in our actual, we had a Kaiser campus is where our distribution point was. You can have a checkpoint in here if you like, or out in the street. I said, it's kind of been different every day. Oh, we can do it in here? I said, yeah. I said, we try to arrange this distribution point so to mitigate the traffic and try to bring as much traffic as we can off the roads. Okay, traffic's your problem, it's on you. That's all right. So in my head, I knew I was going to be gone in a couple of days, and I said, okay. So my name goes around that I caused this problem. They won't be able to find me, and I knew he was dealing with a lot of stress. It was clear, and so I can't make this up. Immediately after that, I turn around and a car comes barreling towards me. Two of them. They went through the cones that we set up to direct their traffic because they saw a PD, or actually it was the sheriff's office, and then they stopped. One stop from there. So here's the deputy that was just a little angry at everybody, not just me, and then these two cars. And I said, I was like, all I need is for 200 cars to do what these people are doing, right? Because it would just be chaos. And so I look at the car and I say, I was like, excuse me, sir, the cones were there for you to keep driving forward and go to the come. I just need to pass and get to my house. I say, well, the officers just got here, the deputy's will head out there, and then behind them was a lady. I said, just move back. I'm not going back. So I look back at him, he's like, that's my wife. So, okay? I said, so I mean, like, well, the deputies will be out there, sir. I can't have everybody come in here. If you could go, head back. Hey, man, this is a real shit show. So, like I said, the rounds kept coming sometimes. So all right, sir, I get it. He's like, my wife's a PIO. This was put out. She works at the county administrator's office. This isn't how things are supposed to be. All right, sir, well, you know, there's a safety issue. I'm in charge here. I need to make sure things remain safe. I need to make sure the operations move. We have a lot of bodies on here, and the vehicles need to go in a certain way. And I completely understand where you're coming from. If you could just please head back to okay, I'll head back over to council. So I give that example to show how there's a lot of positive experience, right? There's a ton. Sonoma County is a great county to work with. A real sense of community there. They really looked out for each other. They were effective in the state's worst fire. So there's a lot of good. And then there's also just a lot of other stuff, and that's the kind of what you got to prepare yourself when you go to an event like this.
So I'll try to be brief. I think we're eating up a lot of time. I just want to share a couple of quick stories, if I can, a couple of experiences that I had. He mentioned that it was just a typical tract neighborhood, just like it reminded me of anyone in our service area. I grew up in Newark. It could have easily been the neighborhood I grew up in, the Coffee Park area. One of the things that happened, I talked about how I initially did my onboarding, and it was, all right, be proficient immediately. First 3 days were rather hectic. At the end of my third day, there was a Safeway a couple blocks away, and I went to the Safeway, and I heard a couple of women talking about, one lady was saying that her son's house had burned down, her grandchildren living with her. Other lady was saying that she was evacuated. I wasn't really kind of peripherally listening. And when I got in line, I had my badge. They took my badge when I departed. I guess they left Jake a souvenir. But when I approached the woman, she looked at my badge and she said, "Oh, are you from the area?" And I said, "No, I'm from the East Bay." And she said, "Well, are you up here fighting the fires?" And I said, "Well, not directly." I said, "But I'm working in the emergency center, supporting the frontline efforts." And she came up and embraced me, and she just started crying, and she just kept saying, "Thank you, thank you." It was really at that point that it really kind of hit me, because I was just seeing fire and disaster, and it sort of separated from it. And that was the point that I really got connected with it, and it really kind of resonated. And I sat in my car for a few minutes before I could drive away just to process that. So that was something really heavy that happened to me, and it just kind of validated and let me know that everything that we were doing was really for the benefit. So, yeah, so that was, where's our next slide? Oh, go back up one more. Nope. If you will. No, go to my picture. Oh. I want to see my picture. So there's my picture. That's my desk I manned for 11 days. There's me working with somebody, probably telling her she needed to go somewhere. So I just wanted to point that out. That was my little home, my cube.
You get in yellow as you do in this suit. Yeah. And this is just a short picture. We just kind of want to give a snapshot of where we are for the time. A lot of time in the final 7 days about the build of Sethy's operation. This gamely looking guy here with a yellow vest with me. That's Ken from South City Fire, National Guardsmen. These are the multiple volunteers that all volunteered to help with operations. Essentially, Ken and I and Jim Leddy and Brian were a team that we got in this routine of spending the night, burning the candle to plan for the operations, figure out what resources we need, coordinate the resources, and then be like, well, we mitigated what's going to be a mess tomorrow as much as we can. Now we can go to bed. And then the next day we would show up to these different locations. At one point we had 8 different locations, and we got in a routine of setting up shop, giving the briefs. This is an operational safety brief here to everybody on all part of the team, and what was going to happen. And then when the first car drove through, we'd leave and do it again at the next spot. So that's basically what my routine was for about 8 days. And now Dan and I are going to go over some takeaways. What's that? Do it real quick? Okay. So I'll burn through these ones. Have a plan for your family. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that goes for our district, if something happens here and if you get deployed to help somebody else out. 18% of what I was told, 18% of the staff I was working with in AOC lost their homes. One person told me he was evacuated Sunday night, and at 03 in the morning he got a call to report to the EOC. And at 08 he was at the staging area that they had, and he was already receiving hundreds of cots and pillows and blankets from Cal OES and FEMA who decided on their own to push forward overnight. And this stuff just started showing up. And so he couldn't be worried about his home, he couldn't be worried about his family. Caroline, who was in charge of us, she moved there to retire, work a few years, retire. She lost her $3 million home on top of the Sonoma Ridge. And she'd been working nonstop when we met her. And she was burned a lot of midnight oil as well. So you got to have those plans in place. If you just can't work if your family's not doing fine. Learn how to manage emergencies right. There's so many things to do to prepare, in our particular case for the big one, the 8.0. Infrastructure improvements, plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we need to focus on being able to manage emergency, and that goes for all government agencies, it really makes a difference between people not repopulating, like in Louisiana, and people repopulating, like in Sonoma County, fairly quickly. Emergency management's huge. The executive staff needs to be aware of their staff's commitment to the emergency response. I bring that up because Caroline Judy, she was the director for general services, and the way their system was is that every 12 hours, the HR would have people report to the EOC. And so she, soon enough after a week, she started getting calls from these different directors saying, hey, why do you have so-and-so? And who you have so-and-so? And when am I getting so-and-so back? And so, nothing got out of control, or, there wasn't a whole bunch of tension, but people weren't aware that there was two operations going on. There was business continuity and there was the management of emergency. And so the people that were head of the departments working on business continuity were concerned because they didn't have their people. They just didn't quite get the concept that they were dedicated to the emergencies until they weren't needed anymore. So that was a takeaway from working with those heads of departments.
So we need to continue to develop our emergency response business continuity plans. We need to continue to identify all our contracts and make sure those are solidified. These are some things that we're going to continue to work on, make sure our mutual aid assistance agreements and all that are in place. We want to exercise our plans. Probably more training is always better than less. And now we can do more focused training with what we've experienced, so hopefully we can tailor some of that stuff. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is item number 4 there. Everything that we did in support of that was heavily documented. If you didn't document it, didn't happen, and everything documented is for the future of getting that reimbursement later. So it was really critical, and that was one of the things that really that was just paramount and really pushed on you that it's a very necessary thing, because when you go to reconcile all those things later on, there's tons of stuff to deal with, and as it's going, you have no idea what you're up against. So to get any kind of reimbursement, that was probably the biggest message. So to bring this thing home, I appreciate you guys listening to our stories. It was quite the experience. I want to thank the board, all the staff, particularly my staff underneath me that had to hold down the fort while I was gone. Our customers too, because we're there representing the district. And so I will say this: when the woman at Safeway gave me the hug and thanked me, it was for all of you and for our customers. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Well, I am very glad that you get to go. I am very glad that we get to help out the Greater Bay Area community. I'm also very glad that we learned something that's useful to improve our own response. I'm also really, really glad that other water districts and other agencies get to appreciate the expertise and the excellence of our staff. Job well done. Also, compliments to the staff that has been left behind in the district. I am in a unique position right now, have to backfill for certain people that have been deployed to Napa and Sonoma at my day job. So that is not exactly easy to do your own work and somebody else's. So compliments to staff who get left behind, who's behind and filling the hole. So thank you to everybody. And a personal thank you. I actually have a friend who lost his house. I have friends that have been evacuated multiple times. My husband also worked for Keysight Technologies. Their headquarters is Fountain Grove in Santa Rosa. A couple of the buildings burned down. He also has friends and acquaintances that lost their homes. So thank you personally from both Ken and I. We really appreciate your effort.
Gunther?
I can't say enough to thank you guys for going up there. I think one of the real interesting takeaways is you guys going up there. I mean, this is a water district. We went to Liberty. We sent field teams. This incident, the support teams, what the value of what we learned through you guys up there is, you can't put a dollar sign on that. To be involved in that at the field level, in the back, the logistics, what you're doing with the vehicles, nobody sees that. You know, they wonder why Puerto Rico is such a mess. Well, it's an island and it's gone. You know, Sonoma is right next to us. Yeah, we could put you guys, drive you up there. I'm curious, when you got up there, where did you stay? Because I know that's something they've talked about, is that you just don't show up.
Yeah, we were fortunate to be taken care of. We were the first arrivals that actually got a hotel.
Mhm.
So, I mean, our complaints were minimum. It was a Holiday Inn, it's a soft opening, so there was cold showers for a few days.
Well, I showed up the night before, and so the guy, because they told us, well, we'll provide lodging and everything will be handled for you. So I showed up the night before. The guy says, well, we got this warehouse that used to be this place, and I think we got a guy setting up cots, and I was like, I'm going to go try to find a hotel room. He said, you're not going to find anything, but I found one, and it wasn't very nice, but that's why I said the first time. But the rest of the time, we were well taken care of.
But I mean, that's part of it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you guys are part of that section. You know, the trucks don't run
All right.
if the stuff fails.
Right, our section did coordinate the hotel
Yeah.
and the trucks and all that.
And so, I mean, a huge, valuable lesson. And thanks for going. I mean, you know, I think almost everybody knows somebody. One of my coworkers, his sister, they were evacuated by basically the fire department banging down their door at 3 o'clock in the morning. They didn't lose their house. It was damaged. So, yeah, thank you. And I think it's great for us, but, you know, to help our neighbors is the Safeway woman far more important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I think directors Huang and Gunther really summarized a lot of what I was going to say. Thank you both for going out there and for providing the support and for representing the ACWD in a great fashion. And I'm glad that we were able to bring back a lot of that experience so that it informs us, especially when we prepare for an emergency like this in our own area. We have two members of our staff who are very, very experienced in this and can really help us plan accordingly. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, Jake and Dan, thank you very much for the presentation. There's a lot to learn from what you're presenting. I'm sure all the knowledge that you gained here, you're going to pass on to others downstream in the organization, and your knowledge will be of value in the future. I'd like to share a little story. After the last board meeting, the following morning I left on vacation. I drove north for a week to Southern Oregon and Crater Lake and some other places. And the whole time I was driving up, there were fleets of vehicles driving down Highway 5 from Washington, Oregon, Idaho. And it was just like one stream after another of vehicles coming down to help with the fires. And on the return trip, I stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Redding, and they had CAL FIRE posted there with 4 large buses that were command posts.
Yeah.
All the way up in Redding, and I asked them at breakfast, why are you staying here? And they said, because all the hotels are taken up and down Highway 5, but this gives us easy access over the ridge to get over into the Northern Valley areas where the fires were. But they were manning those buses all night long, and were going on and off shifts, and they had, I don't even know, countless, dozens by dozens of pole utility workers going down, people that had to do repairs and putting up power lines and everything else. It's not just a fire response, but it was really quite dramatic to see that all of Highway 5 was just, it was its own emergency response center right there. So thank you for all your efforts.
Well, thank you. It's always amazing how much you pick up when you go into these disasters, none of which can be predicted. It's a matter of identifying the assets and being able to apply the situation. But I find it interesting that you were not involved in water-related activities through Cal Warren, but rather into a more county-wide response center. And it'll be interesting as you look at how we work, and maybe we need to broaden our concept of operations when we get into emergency response, realize that it's not just handling our distribution system, there are far more activities we have to interface with. So thank you again. I have 2 letters that we'd like to give you from the board, and with our appreciation.
You want me to say something?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Jake and Dan provided wonderful daily logs to executive staff, which I really appreciated. And I plagiarized and provided that to staff through my blog that is available on our social media. And I can say that I can kind of see how many people are reading it and following it by the number of likes that I get. There's a way to like it in SharePoint. And I think we were hitting the record in terms of number of likes. So I think measuring by that parameter, ACWD employees were able to kind of live vicariously through Jake and Dan and following, along with what you guys were experiencing. And I think also that it helped make employees feel proud that ACWD was able to help our fellow Californians. And thank you for your service, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
And I'm sorry there's no money in those envelopes.
Thank you. We have one other report, which is the finance.
Yes, we're skipping to item 5.5 on the agenda, which is a presentation of the Alameda County Water District's audited financial statement for fiscal year 2016-17. And John Wunderlich, our Manager of Finance, will kick this item off.
All right. So first, I would like to recognize in the audience with us today are representatives from MGO, our auditor, who will make a presentation following my remarks. I'd also like to recognize Ms. Grajeda and Ms. Herrera from our accounting unit, who worked many, many hours on preparing these financial statements and working with the auditors. They're also here to answer any difficult questions. So first, by way of background, each year the district prepares a comprehensive annual financial report, and that's comprised of our basic financial statements, the notes to the financial statements, analysis of the financial statements, statistical and historical information about the district's finances, and a transmittal letter that highlights the district's achievements during the fiscal year. Each member of the board should have received a copy of the report and related communications. There are also additional copies of the financial report on the back table should any members of the public be interested in taking a copy home with them. Following their audit of our financial statement, MGO determined that they could issue an unmodified or clean opinion. That is the highest level opinion you can receive from your auditor. Before turning the time over to them for their presentation, I did just want to highlight a few of our financial outcomes from the prior fiscal year. First, the district's net position increased by approximately $20 million through a combination of customer capital contributions and increased revenues from developer fees and water sales. Operating revenues increased by approximately $11 million from a combination of increases in developer fees as well as water sales revenue. Operating expenses increased by approximately $2 million or 2.2% due to slight increases in a wide range of categories. And I would like to point out that for the first time since 2007-08, our operating revenues exceeded our operating expenses. Capital contributions to the district totaled $4.1 million. That was a decrease of $1.1 million from the prior year. Capital contributions reflect the value of customer completed jobs that are then dedicated to the district. Primarily, this is developer assets that are then connected to our public water system. A few other things that we accomplished during the prior year were, of course, implementation of the low-income assistance program known as Help on Tap. As far as key financial information related to rates, at the beginning of the fiscal year, the district rescinded the drought surcharges, and then on March 1st of 2017, implemented a 20% rate increase to address the revenue decline associated with the historic drought, as well as to fund capital investments without new debt, address increases in water supply, employee compensation, and power and chemical costs, and to responsibly fund our long-term pension and retiree health benefit liabilities. Now, each year the district also implements a number of new accounting standards. None of the new standards this year had a material impact on our finances, but next year there's a new standard about how we account for our other post-employment benefits. That's primarily our retiree health care. And so that will need to be reflected on the balance sheet with next year's audit. So more details to come with that with next year's financial report. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bullock, from partner with MG&O, to give a presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. We're here to report the results of the 2017 audits that we just completed. So I'd first like to say that this presentation is not going to be as interesting as the previous presentation, but we'd like to just recognize that as your auditors, congratulations, I think, are in order for contributing to the first response. It's very admirable, and I enjoyed listening to that presentation. For purposes of the audit, the scope of work that we performed was on your financial statements, which is commonly referred to as the CAFR. That's your annual financial report that you prepare for the district. In addition to that, we submit 3 other reports: the Government Auditing Standards Report, the Debt Compliance Report, and the Appropriations Limit, also referred to sometimes as the GAN limit. Those reports have all been completed and submitted to the district. And then finally, the report to the Board of Directors. That's more or less a summary of our audit that we summarize key information that we want to make known to you as the results of our audit. So we'll go through this presentation very briefly. We did have a chance to meet with the Finance Committee and go into more depth, and so we'll keep this more brief and open it up to any questions you might have at the end. So the first report I'd like to discuss is the CAFR, and it comprises your basic financial statements. We perform our audit under 2 sets of standards: generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. Government auditing standards have a little more focus on internal controls and compliance, and that's why we issued a separate report that we'll talk about next. And we're happy to report that we issued an unmodified opinion, and that's, as John had mentioned, that's the highest level of assurance that we could provide as your auditors. Basically, what we're saying is these financial statements are fairly stated, okay? And management is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements, for establishing internal controls, and we're basically hired in to take a look and validate that information as an unbiased, independent review. In addition to the financial statements, you'll find the required supplementary information. The reason we separate that is because we don't express an opinion on the required supplementary information, but we subject that information to management inquiries and we compare it to the audited financial statements to ensure its consistency. And so the management's discussion and analysis is prepared by management, and that offers a lot of good context to help understand the numbers, because sometimes just looking at financial statements and note disclosures doesn't give you the full picture, so that adds a little bit of context. And then the other two schedules focus more on pension and OPEB, and some trend information there to let you know how you are doing in terms of funding those obligations. And then finally, the last section I'm highlighting is the introductory and statistical sections, and those are unaudited information, but they're also very helpful in providing context to the organization. The introductory section includes a transmittal letter, which talks about some of the achievements in terms of district policy and what's important to the district. And then the statistical schedules in the back give you about a 10-year trend, 10-year history of information that kind of lets you see how the district has been performing over the past 10 years. The Government Auditing Standards Compliance Report is essentially our report on what we observed as we did our audit, on especially highlighting the areas of internal controls and compliance. And we're happy to report that we didn't see any internal control deficiencies that rose to the level of being reportable matters, so we didn't have any findings either on internal controls or on compliance-related matters. For the debt compliance report, we look at the debt covenants in relation to your bond issues and look at primarily the debt coverage ratios and other debt covenants, and there were no compliance findings there. And then finally, on the appropriations limit, you approve the appropriations limit each year. We took a look at it and didn't see any compliance findings with the appropriations limit. So those are all very clean reports. And then finally, sometimes this letter is referred to as the management letter, but it's our summary results of the audit. There's about 7 things that were required to report to the board. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but the first one has to do with whether or not there's implementation of new standards or changes in consistency or significant estimates that you should be aware of. And so I'll just highlight a couple things. OPEB is coming, there's nothing really significant this year, no significant changes in terms of accounting policies and practices, but OPEB is now going to be recognized in your financial statements much the way pension is. And so that's going to be a significant change next year. You have your trust fund with Serbit, and you've set aside funds there, and you've been funding your OPEB now for past probably 10 years when GASB 45 was implemented. And so that'll be a big change, bringing that liability into your financial statements, and that'll be next year. Also on the estimates, I just want to make sure that you're aware that the financial statements contain estimates, and there's just no way to avoid that. And that's just part of financial reporting. Some things are more complicated than others and require actuarial valuations, such as OPEB and your pension. And some things are less complicated in terms of fair value of investments, and you don't have a lot of risky investments that would create issues with determining fair value, but things of that nature. So there are estimates in the financial statements. And as far as the other items there, we didn't have any issues that came up during the audit that we need to bring to your attention. Staff was very cooperative. From our perspective, it was a very good audit. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you and see if you have any questions.
Thank you.
No questions from you?
I'm good.
Okay. As the longtime chair of the Finance Committee, I would just like to make a few comments for the edification of the board here. So, first of all, and thank you very much for all of your work on everything you've done during the course of our audit. I know I've been in here numerous times in the finance department when your team has been in here, and it really is an extraordinary amount of background work that most people don't see, and requires really competent people too, so thank you. But let me make a few observations. First of all, when we first engaged MGO several years ago and discontinued with our prior auditor, in our supplementary report, which each one of us has here tonight, what's outstanding is that this is the first report where there are no recommendations being made to the district or our finance department in terms of where we can make improvements. In your first report, I believe there were like 14 or 16 different recommendations, which we appreciated at the time, having a new auditor, to kind of give us some guidance on where to make improvements in the organization, how to clean up things, how to tie things together better. And each year we've had fewer and fewer recommendations, and this is the first year where we are down to 0. So I consider that quite an accomplishment. And thank you for all that guidance that you've offered us in the past. Second observation is, as Jonathan Wunderlich mentioned, this is the first year in 10 years since 2007, 2008, when we went into the big recession, that our operating revenues have exceeded our operating expenses. And while that is good, I would like to just reflect on it for a moment and offer a little bit of my own insight here, if I may. And this is without criticism to anyone on our staff or to our auditors. But if you go back to 1980 through the mid-2000s, we had declining interest rates, and it really helped out on our investment front, because we were getting pretty substantial returns on our investments, most of which are in bonds. And the nature of the bond market is that as interest rates are declining, you are taking advantage of the markets with appreciation, but in a more stable interest rate environment or going up, those returns are not as robust as we've had in the past. And you may remember when I was a member of the audience, not on the board, I was saying that the district was too dependent upon its investment returns, which inevitably are cyclical, and that once those returns go down or you have a recession or anything like that, the district, the agency, can be really impacted. And we were when the economy soured. And now my observation is that our investment returns are way down the last few years, but the amount of development that's going on in the community is going way up, and it's kicking into the district on our facilities connection charges. And so we've gone from like $1 million up to $11.5 million suddenly, and the development fees, facilities connection fees, are kind of making up for the investment loss that we had. And if it weren't for those development fees coming in, we would not be, our operating revenues would not be exceeding our operating expenses. And so we're in the 8th year of an economic expansion, and this is the second longest expansion since World War II. At some point this will terminate, we'll go back down, and so my fear is that we will be in an environment where we lack both the investment returns and the development charges that are coming into the district. So it gets back to my what I've been preaching for a long time, which is that we need to get to the stage where water revenues by themselves are covering all operating expenses, including depreciation and amortization. That to me is the paramount goal for the district to reach, because at that point we are self-sustainable on our water revenues, and any of the non-water revenues that we have coming in can be used to pay down debt, our long-term liabilities, and can be used proactively in other ways. So we're still a few years away from that, but I'm just expressing that already 10 years ago I was dreaming about this and trying to push us in this direction, and I'm still trying to get us to that stage where water revenues cover operating costs. In reference to tables 1 and 10 that are in the back of the report, I would just like to note that, and I'm complimenting our staff here, we did a really good job the last 4 years controlling expenses in the district. We only went up about $4.5–5 million over that 4-year period, and so in terms of controlling expenses, that really helped us out quite a bit in terms of gaining parity between operating revenues and expenses. And just to note, we really kept the belt tight the last 4 years. When we had ratepayers that have been coming to our board meetings, you know, when we've had rate increase discussions, that are complaining that our costs are out of control. And yet, if you look at line by line, our costs over the last 4 years are relatively flat, except for one area, which is really more a factor of the marketplace, and that's transmission and distribution, right? And so that's where about the $5 million increase in expenses happened over the last 4 years. And I think our ratepayers deserve to hear what's really going on in the organization, that despite complaints about costs being out of control, we have managed our costs extremely well during this last 4-year environment. So once again, thank you very much for all of your efforts.
Thank you. First of all, it's particularly impressive that we had no findings. It's the first time in many, many years of elected office I can recall an audit that had no significant recommendations, and that's positive. In time past, we've had ones that were multi-year as we tried to implement a new accounting system. I would note, though, that while we did have a positive net operating number, the budget last year, adopted on June 29th, called for a $14 million net operating loss, and that included a 25%, not 20% rate increase. We had now coming in at $6.5 million net operating income. That's a $20 million swing on less than a $100 million budget. I remain concerned about our budgeting process. I'm concerned that our rate structure is inherently unstable because we don't match variable expenses with variable charges and fixed expenses with fixed charges. And hopefully we can work toward a rate structure that's adequate, equitable, and boring.
Yeah, I'm not...
But we can go then to even longer 218.
Yeah, sometimes on the budgeting side, it doesn't match up with GAAP-based financial statements. Sometimes you're including in budgeting, you're including infrastructure and other capital expenditures that don't flow through expenses. So it's kind of hard sometimes to do an apples-to-apples comparison.
This is not a built-in number that we have with this net operating. If you look at what happened, we had a one-time accounting change for $4.6 million on the positive side. We had a significant increase, even greater this year, on facility charges, and we under-executed on our budgeted engineering and capital sums. That's what made up the $20 million. It wasn't based on sound business operations. So we've got a challenge ahead of us. When we look at our unfunded liabilities, they have grown significantly. By dropping it to 6.5% discount rate, you add 0.14, so it comes 6.65. We've gone to $111 million now, unfunded liability on PERS, and probably another $40 million or so when we adjusted. So somewhere in the area of 6 times our W-2s. That's not a settling number, and it's one that's going to really be glaring at us in next year's accounting system when the new Gatsby rules kick in. So we got through the year. We've got more for the first time in 10 years. We're running at a loss, but it wasn't because of normal operating expenses. I would suggest it was some extraordinary good fortune, and now the challenge is to get a more stabilized financial future. That's my soapbox. Thank you. Is there any comments from staff?
I agree with the soap.
Is there any other issue or comment from the staff?
I didn't have any further comments, but if there are any other questions from board members.
There is a request for board action.
I was about to move to accept staff recommendation to accept the audited financial statements and accompanying report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017.
I would like to second.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang?
Aye.
And Weed?
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We then go to our back to our action calendar, which is item 5.6, the resolution authorizing amendment to an agreement with the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District for the Lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage Improvement Projects.
Yes, and I should have mentioned, President Weed, that I believe staff is planning on covering item 5.6 and 5.7 together. So
would that be 2 separate motions or one?
we'll hopefully be able to guide you through the process, but they are related items, so I would turn that over to Mr. Stevenson, who will provide guidance to the board on exactly what actions we need this evening.
Thank you.
Correct, and thank you very much, and good evening. And just for the record, I'll read in the title for item 5.7, since we'll look at both of these together. And item 5.7 is authorization of amendment to agreement for engineering services for the Lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage Improvement Projects. So as Mr. Shaver pointed out, both of these items are linked and interdependent, and so I'd like to present both of them at the same time, and we can take action on them at the end. So I'll deliver a short presentation. It may not be as exciting as either of the past two, but we'll cover the project elements for the Lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage projects briefly, talk about the agreements that are requiring amendment that we're considering tonight. That is the cooperative agreement with Alameda County, between Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District and Alameda County Water District, and the professional services agreement we have with GHD Engineering, providing engineering services in support of the Fish Passage projects. And then talk briefly about the purpose of the amendments. Also talk briefly about status and next steps, and then those recommendations. So as the board is aware, the overall project objectives are to provide for fish passage through Lower Alameda Creek by while at the same time preserving our water supply reliability by ensuring that we have our diversions off of Alameda Creek screened to prevent fish from entering our groundwater recharge facilities, and also laddering the rubber dams that are part of ACWD's groundwater recharge operations. The projects that have been completed to date are shown here. We've screened 3 of the 5 sets of diversions from Alameda Creek, and we've removed our lowermost rubber dam number 2, and modified its foundation to provide for fish passage. So the remaining projects in this program are to ladder the upper rubber dam, that's rubber dam number 3, and also there'll be a fabric replacement or replacement of the dam material associated with that project. Also to consolidate the diversions from Alameda Creek into Shin Pond
at one location and screen those diversions. And then finally to ladder the rubber dam number 1 together with the Alameda County Flood Control District's drop structure known as the Bart Weir. So the first two elements are ACWD's responsibility, and the last one is a cooperative project between Alameda County Water District and the Flood Control District. So the two agreements we're talking about tonight include the GHD Engineering Services Agreement. The provisions in that agreement and the dollars that are included in that agreement apply to all of the project elements moving forward. And the dollar provisions in the cooperative agreement between ACWD and the Flood Control District apply only to the lower rubber dam number 1 Bart Weir Fishway. So the cooperative agreement with Alameda County provides that cost-sharing framework, provides for an equal cost split between Alameda County Water District and the county. The engineering services agreement with GHD provides for all the engineering-related services, including design, plans, specifications, cost estimates, and so forth, but also support for environmental, regulatory, and permitting work. And of course, that agreement applies to all of the lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage Improvement projects. So both agreements need, they're both structured to be amended as the projects progress, and both of them need to be amended now in order to complete the remaining work. So what is the remaining work? We'll take a quick look at each one of those sites and bring the board up to speed. In terms of status, the rubber dam number 3, fish ladder and bag replacement, the design is complete. So in terms of engineering services, there's very little left to do here. And in fact, we advertised that project today for construction. So today was a big day for ACWD and moving forward with this program. And of course, the plan is to do construction in 2018. The remaining engineering service related work is minor work related to O&M manual and so forth, and we would be also requiring GHD's assistance during construction. Services related to construction for rubber dam number 3 have already been added to the GHD contract, so that's not included in tonight's action. The Shin consolidated diversions and fish screens are about 90% complete from a design standpoint. We've got some technical work to do to confirm submergence with the screens under varying operating conditions and so forth. We also have to do a corrosion evaluation and design and update the structural basis of design to current building codes and some other things, but we're getting close with the Shin diversions and fish screens. Again, services during construction would be added into our future amendment, not tonight's amendment. The rubber dam number 1, Bart Weir Fishway, is about 80% overall. We've got some work to do related to the 2015 fabric replacement and equipment modifications from a design standpoint. And I wanted to mention, along with this, is that that work may require that we bring back Hydrotech. That was the rubber dam system supplier that worked on that rubber dam replacement in 2015. And so there may be an amendment on the Hydrotech contract coming to the board shortly. But we also do need to do some other technical work, some work on the rubber dam number 1 control building, incorporate some value-added suggestions that staff has brought up, and other related engineering services. The portion of the rubber dam number 1 Bart Weir Fishway that's furthest from being complete is the lower Fishway. So the lower Fishway is only at a preliminary design level. We've not taken it to 100% design. We've been modifying that lower Fishway to ensure that it's providing fish passage connectivity and sediment transport connectivity with improvements in Alameda Creek downstream of the channel. And also, we've now received all of our key permitting, and so now we know that no changes to the lower Fishway are going to be required. So now we're okay to bring this portion of the facility to 100% design. So that's what's included in this GHD amendment. And again, some other miscellaneous engineering services related to the rubber dam number 1 Bart Weir Fishway. So in order to complete the remaining work, and I should add that there are other services related to environmental and permitting support and regulatory support and things like that that are also included in this amendment. but I covered the major sort of technical work. And in order to incorporate all of that work into these agreements, we need to amend them both. So the cooperative agreement with the county would be amended to include that work and to also increase the amount of reimbursement in that agreement that's to be provided by the county. Again, that's an equal cost share. The county's contribution would increase by $218,789. That's an estimated number. And if you're eagle-eyed, you may notice that that's a different number than what's in the staff report because it's an estimated number, and we've been continuing to work out the details on that agreement until just the other day. And the staff report was put out a little while ago. So that would bring the county's total reimbursement to about $500,000. This item is to go before the County Board of Supervisors on November 21st, at least tentatively at this point. The agreement with GHD for engineering services would be amended to include the above described scope of work. That would bring the authorization up by $664,035 for a total authorization of about $2.8 million for the GHD agreement. Just a quick status in terms of overall permitting and grant funding. For permitting, what's allowed us to advertise today is that we've received now all the key permits that we've been chasing for a very long time now. We received the Army Corps 408 and the National Marine Fisheries Service biological opinion in the middle of October. And that was then followed by the Army Corps 404, and we had previously received the Fish and Wildlife 1600 permits for construction. And as of right now, we're reviewing the draft Regional Water Quality Control Board 401 permit. So we've got the key permits to allow us to go forward. There are some other more minor approvals and encroachment permits that are outstanding, but staff is confident that they're forthcoming. In terms of grant funding, just for rubber dam number 3, I've listed the 3 key grant funding commitments. We're at about $4.25 million in grant funding just for the rubber dam number 3 project, which brings our overall grant funding commitments to on the order of $6.8 million. And staff is pursuing every and all other grants that we can secure in support of all of the projects. And I got to hand it to staff really for both the permitting efforts and for the grant funding efforts. There's been a lot of staff here across multiple departments really working on these issues very actively in order to secure these needed elements. And I guess I'll hit a different button. So the planned next steps are to, right now we're looking at bringing construction, award of construction back to the board in February, and then going to construction for the summer of 2018. That's for RD3. In the meantime, we'd be incorporating the remaining engineering services into those agreements and finalizing the design and construction documents as described here. And once completed, we'd then be moving to construction of the RD1 Bart Weir Fishway and shin diversions and screens beginning the summer of 2019. So, staff's recommendations are, for item 5.6, by motion, adopt a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute a third amendment to the agreement for fish passage projects in the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel with the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And item 5.7 is, by motion, authorize the general manager to execute a sixth amendment to the professional services agreement with GHD Consulting Engineers Incorporated for additional engineering services in an amount not to exceed $664,035 for the Lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage Improvement Projects, Job 21012, 21019, and 21006. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
All right. Questions from the board?
No questions, but just congratulations for getting all those permits. It's been a long and tough road. I compliment the staff not only for the grant, but for getting those permits. The hardest part is actually to educate the regulatory agencies to understand what we are actually trying to do and actually what the purpose of our project is. So, thank you. Great job.
I appreciate that. I'll pass it on.
I'd just like to thank the staff. I'm still fascinated by the difficulties that we've encountered over the past 20 years to build two fish headers. I could understand if this was a dam. I could understand if it was a highway. You know, though those are considered evil projects, this is supposed to be a good project. It's, you know, depending on how you look at it. But 20 years, and I just want to congratulate staff that maybe we're going to get through it. But I think that should be a lesson to everyone is this is how complex things have gotten today. And that things have changed. Times are not the same as we were in the 1960s, 1970s. And this is the environment we have to live in, and we're going to live in. And say, let's hope they work.
Well, first off, congratulations, staff, on getting the permits. I just had one quick question, which is, you mentioned that so far we've gotten $4.68 million in grants, but on the slide it said that you're still pursuing more opportunities. How much more do you think we can get in grant funding?
It's always a real trick. So just to clarify, we've got about $4.25 million for RD3 that's been committed, and that brings the total for all of the projects together to about 6.8. So if I gave you different numbers, my apologies. Yeah, so we're pursuing a number of other grant opportunities. I hate to volunteer, but there's substantial amounts that are potentially available, but we're pursuing everything that's out there. Into the millions is where we're trying to go.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just a couple of questions. Has the county agreed to their portion of the reimbursement that we're expecting?
So county staff have been very supportive. We've been working on this agreement for many weeks now, the amendment. And county staff have been supportive. This is being recommended to their board on the 21st. I am told by county staff that they expect this to be a 5-0 vote, very straightforward, but one never knows.
And the second question I have, I probably should have asked in a committee meeting, like Water Resources, but after our recent visit up to the Alameda Creek diversion, and where we saw the fish ladder above Calaveras Reservoir, in reference to the lower fish passage at the Bart Weir, it just seems to me that the vertical rise that the fish have to overcome is still as severe as what the Bart Weir itself represents. So I'm wondering whether everybody's in agreement that this is the proper angle for a fish ladder, or whether it should be longer, more horizontal than vertical.
Yeah, so you zeroed in on really a key element of the ladder. And that's why this has been only developed to a preliminary design level right now, because there's been a lot of back and forth with the National Marine Fisheries Service, other regulators, our designers, everybody involved to try and ensure that this is going to work. And so that's why it's not been taken to a 100% level to date. So I'm no fish expert. We've got some of the best fish experts around working on the project in our consultant side. So this is the design that is meant to do the job.
Well, I can see the upper fish ladder near RD3. That to me, just from a layman's viewpoint, looking at the design, looks like it would be operational. But I do have some concerns about the lower fish passage. That it just seems like a real vertical challenge for the fish. And I've recently, well, in the last few years I visited other fish passages, and this one just seems challenging.
Well, we'd certainly be available to bring more information to committee and so forth to kind of further explain the rationale behind the design that we've got.
So
I would hate for us to spend the money and then the very first step in getting the fish upstream is the biggest obstacle that we're facing, or they're facing.
So just a quick question. Ed, is the preliminary design a step pool, a series of step pools?
Correct.
Right, so the barred weir is a challenge for our fish. Is actually the combination of the height and the angle of the weir. So if you cut it for one jump, so if you cut it into a series of steps, it's easier for the fish. So they just make multiple small hops instead of one big jump at that height and angle.
Yeah.
So it
But
could
even
be
if this depiction right here,
right.
it just looks really steep.
I know. I'm sure they could find our design expert to explain why it works, but I think the oversimplification is you just break a big jump into a series of little travels and efforts, and they get to rest in between.
You know, if it doesn't work out, we might have to go to a fish cannon like up on the Columbia River.
Does the design come with guarantees?
So, just for the board information, yes, we will bring back information to assure a skeptical director or directors that the fish ladder is designed with the appropriate parameters. And just this portion of the fish ladder, there are places for the fish to go from step to step, as Director Huang indicated, as well as places for the fish to rest. So there's quiet areas too for the water, and the fish take advantage of that. So, but what we will do is, I think in committee, if it's okay, we'll do a deep dive, excuse the pun, into the design so that you feel comfortable.
A deep lift.
Yeah.
Actually, regards design, I understand that this is one of the more complicated fish ladders out there, or will be, and probably would be an extremely dry subject. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. I don't know how else to put it, for the public to see. However, I don't know how far we could do that into a presentation and the possibility of the design of itself, of what we're trying to do. I know we've hired some really serious experts in this field, and it should work. I'm not an expert in this field, but you know, I trust these guys have experience and they know what they're doing. We may be taking on one heck of a project here. And if it does work, and it should work, we should be very proud of that project. And I think the public would be proud of it, but maybe not fully aware of what we're really trying to do here. I very vividly remember one of the original articles describing this thing, and it was so simple. And yet, at the time, I was thinking, this is not simple. And, I mean, staff and these people they're succeeding. And I think this will work. But, you know, you never know until it's built, obviously. But it should work. And I'd like to thank staff for that.
Thank you.
So I just had two other comments here. Want to congratulate staff on the grant awards. I can remember already several years back working on these applications and everything. So this is hundreds and hundreds of hours of staff time and work, and working with multiple partners and agencies. So my compliments there. And the last comment is Mr. Stevenson mentioned that this is coming before the Board of Supervisors on November 21st. And I'd like to open this up to the board. I offered to the general manager that I would be available to go up to the Board of Supervisors to give a very brief, prepared set of remarks, not really a presentation, to the Board of Supervisors, because I consider this really one of the truly extraordinary things that's going on in the county, and I'd really like to have it highlighted there. Currently, it's on consent calendar for the 21st, but if the board welcomes it, I would be happy to go up there and make a short presentation.
I would encourage you to do so.
I would fully support it.
Questions I have. It's been mentioned that we had a $40 million project with the fish ladders. Does that include rubber dam number 1 and the Bart Weir, as well as rubber dam number 3? What is the total cost?
So the total to-go cost, will be part of what comes out of GHD's work in terms of the final cost estimates. But it'd be on the order of 30 million more from where we are.
Where are we now?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, in terms of to-go cost, on the order of $30 million.
Total cost, $30 million. For all the fish ladders?
Correct, for the fish ladders and for the shin diversions.
Now, of that, are we splitting that $30 million with Alameda County Flood Control?
So the portion of the cost that we'll split with the Alameda County Flood Control are just for the rubber dam number 1 and Bart Weir portion. So the district is responsible for the cost of the shin diversions and screens and for rubber dam number 3. So we will be splitting the cost equally for the lower work.
And how much then for rubber dam number 1 and the Weir do you think the total cost would be?
So it'd be something over 10 million is the current estimate.
That's all, because 40 million was thrown out before, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that number came from. I know we've got about 16 million already built, so perhaps that had something to do with the overall program cost.
My other concern was the amount of water that we have to release to operate a fish ladder. Maintaining flows that never existed in nature in order to create this fishery. I've not been supportive of the project from the beginning for a variety of reasons at all levels, and no need to go into that full detail. There was a feeling at one time that we did not need, by former water resource planners since left us and others, that rubber dam number 1 was really not required or needed by this district. It was not something, the comment was made, it's not something we would build today if we were looking at it for the very first time, and yet we rebuilt it after a recent event, and we pay $90,000 a year to have somebody sit there and look at it at night. Part of the challenge is it was not felt that the flood control people would be able to even fund that limited amount without our support. So we will, the item then is before us. We will have to need some actions to get this forward. I will not be supporting it, as I have not supported other issues related to the fish ladder in the past.
I am going to ask for one clarification from staff. I believe the $90,000 security guard cost that Director Wheat referenced is not just for rubber dam number 1. It is the overall cost to provide security to our rubber dam facilities, correct?
It's $7,500 per
That
rubber
is correct.
dam.
Okay.
A total of $90,000 per dam, a total of $180,000 a year to have someone sit there at night and for a while, just even after the dams are down, to watch the water flow down the
I
street.
don't believe those were the numbers that I remember when we were briefed of the security costs, because that was a raw cost, including when we were briefed with the cost amount in the committee. It includes not just the rubber dam facility, they actually go out and walk our other facilities adjacent to Alameda Creek, correct?
That is correct.
Right. So it is not a specific cost, but it's an all-inclusive cost. With that, may I make the motion?
Not the forum to debate this, but we'll have an opportunity in one of the committee sessions
Yeah,
to go into detail.
Yeah.
Talking about cost is perfectly appropriate, but talking about security would
It's
be
not.
appropriate for another venue.
That's definitely true. All right. With that, may I make a motion?
Please.
Or is there any other
And let's
discussion?
have the attorney confirm that we're making the right motions, because we have two items.
Right, so can we do both?
You can act on both.
Okay, so for both item 5.6 and 5.7, I would like to make a motion to support staff recommendations. For 5.6, to adopt a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute a third amendment to the agreement for fish passage projects in the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel with the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. For item 5.7, authorize the general manager to execute a sixth amendment to the professional services agreement with GHD Consulting Engineers, Inc. for additional engineering services in the amount not to exceed $664,035 for the Lower Alameda Creek Fish Passage Improvement Project, Job 21012, 21019, and 21006.
I'd like to second the two motions.
Any comment on the motion? Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang?
Aye.
And Weed?
No. That moves us then on to item 5.8.
Yes.
Authorization to enter into contract to repair a 36-inch groundwater transmission main between Maori Wellfield and Peralta Tyson Blending Facility.
Thank you, President Weed. This item will be presented by Mr. Peterson this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. Staff needs to expedite pipeline repairs to the 36-inch diameter groundwater transmission main between the Maori Wellfield and the Peralta Tyson Blending Facility site after a leak was discovered on October 21st, causing the transmission main to be taken out of service. With this main out of service, groundwater from the below Hayward Fault aquifer is not available as a source of supply at the Peralta Tyson Blending Facility. Because of the large pipe diameter and scope of the repair work, such as deep excavation with the top of the main at least 10 feet below ground surface, an underground utility contractor is needed to perform the repair work. Staff has met with two contractors at the site of the leak and have received written estimates to repair the main. The two contractors that we met with were McGuire and Hester of Alameda, California, and De Freitas Pipeline of Pleasanton, California. The scope of work includes excavating and shoring to expose the 36-inch transmission main, dewatering the main, removing the existing coating and inspecting the pipe failure, repairing the leak, and installing an annular plate around the outside of the pipe at the location of the leak, which is called a butt strap, or cutting out a section of the transmission main and installing a new section. Disinfecting the installed parts, reloading the main and checking for leaks. ACWD personnel would then take water quality samples for bacteriological tests. The pipe would then be backfilled according to ACWD specs and repair any landscape or irrigation lines that are damaged in the landscape area where the pipeline is located. De Freitas Pipeline Incorporated provided the lowest estimate. For the single butt strap repair, the cost given was $55,150. For cutting in a 5-foot section of main, the cost given was $72,000. De Freitas Pipeline estimates that the repairs will take between 7 to 10 calendar days. This means that if the contractor mobilizes onto the site on Monday, November 13th, the repairs could be completed and the transmission main put back into service before Thanksgiving, that being Wednesday, November 22nd. Staff's recommendation is to 1, waive the requirement to seek sealed bids in procurement policy number 1. And 2, authorize the general manager to enter into a contract with De Freitas Pipeline Incorporated to repair the 36-inch groundwater transmission main between the Maui Wellfield and the Peralta Tyson blending facility in an amount not to exceed $125,000. The goal will be to complete the repair work for no more than the prices submitted by De Freitas Pipeline. However, if unforeseen conditions occur that increase the cost to repair the transmission main, having the $125,000 authorized amount will allow the work to proceed without interruption. At the December board meeting, I will report back to the board on the scope of work performed and the final cost. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Several questions. So the leak is located apparently over by Shin Historic Park.
Correct.
What do we expect for traffic concerns? Is this going to affect Peralta?
No, it's on Ridley Drive, which is more of a residential street. It's a block away from Peralta Avenue.
Okay. Do we have any concepts yet as to why this failed?
We have a couple of ideas. Typically, there's corrosion that occurs at welded pipe joints. That's one possibility. Another is because this is so close to the Hayward Fault, there could be pipeline compression or elephant foot that could be occurring. So until we expose the pipe and inspect it, we won't know for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Klein?
Nothing from my end.
Couple of questions here. Do we have a backup pipeline at all, or is this just a singular pipeline between the two fields?
We do have an additional pipeline, a 14-inch pipeline, but that is typically valved out of the system. And so, and that's providing the coolant water to the emergency generators at the Maui Wellfield currently. But because that pipeline has not been in service, it is not a sterile main. We did not want to take the chance and use it because we don't have to from a demand perspective.
So, for the benefit of the rest of the board, I asked for a map, if anybody wants it here, of where the pipeline goes. And the reason I asked for it was because we know that the Hayward Fault runs right across that intersection. And I remember when McGuire and Hester was doing the work all along Maui there for our seismic improvement on the large diameter pipelines, right? They did a terrific job there too. I was actually watching them out in the field. So I realized the urgency of getting this 36-inch main repaired because it's vital to our water supply for our customers. But I wonder whether a larger investment might be entertained by engineering and operations down the road, since this is crossing the Hayward Fault, this very important pipeline, and it was not covered under the original seismic improvements. It's a larger expense. Am I mistaken?
We do have that was included. It's one of 15 Hayward Fault crossings.
Oh, that was one of the 15.
Yes.
Okay.
And at this location, we have the ability to isolate this section of pipeline and install flex hoses to connections that were installed at each end of where it emerges from the Alquist Priolo zone adjacent or corresponding to the Hayward Fault.
Thank you. So it's a jumper type?
Correct.
Isolation jumper? Okay.
Correct.
So, I've just been notified by Director Akbari that His family has a property interest relatively close to this location. So I think now with this information, this was a fast-tracked item onto the board agenda at the last minute, so I apologize for that in the packet. Just to be safe, I think for the record, Director Akbari should recuse himself because he may have a conflict.
Is it within 500 feet?
Yeah.
So go ahead and recuse yourself,
Yeah,
and
I'll
we'll...
recuse myself for section 5.8.
Thank you. We'll see you in a moment.
So, Mr. Peterson, how close is the, where the leak is, and I'm talking within feet if you can tell me, how close is this to the actual fault?
I would say within 50 feet.
Close. So, maybe I'm thinking a little too extravagantly here, and I'm certainly not as smart as the staff is, but is on such an important pipeline, is there any reason to put in like one of those accordion and ball joint pipes that might be movable during
That's a great question. The approach taken in analyzing the methods of preparing for an earthquake of a large magnitude is where are the risks? What are our vulnerabilities? And as an example, we do have what you describe for our 48-inch pipeline that we call it the Irvington 48-inch pipeline from Whitfield Reservoir into the Centerville area, Fremont. So we have a pipeline within a pipeline that allows for movement with flex joints at each end. At this location, being that it's a raw water supply, we assessed what the consequences would be for pipeline failure, and it was determined that the best approach in terms of finding that sweet spot between cost and value would be to install a temporary connection where we would install two 12-inch diameter flex hoses at that location until we could repair the main.
Yeah, and if I may, and Mr. Stevenson may have additional information to provide, where pipelines cross the fault and they're in a sort of, it depends on the geometry between the pipeline and the fault itself. So in areas in which the pipeline is being subjected to compression, like Mr. Peterson indicated, the cost of proactively dealing with that kind of situation can be very expensive, and it can be very complicated. So for those types of pipelines, because of that geometry, those were more often given isolation valves and an ability to jump with hose, as opposed to the pipelines that were being subjected to more traditional type stresses, where they were retrofitted with ductile steel so that they could survive the earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also received isolation valves and hoses just as a belt and suspender approach.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm supportive of quickly getting this repaired, but I did want to ask those few questions.
Great questions.
And the only reason why I know that was I was in a little bit of a different role when this project came to be.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Good. I'll move that.
Or do we have a motion?
I'll move the staff
Hold on, I
recommendation.
think, do you have a comment?
Before the vote is made, I just wanted to clarify for the record that Director Akbari, after the staff read the report, realized that he had property within here and recognized that he had a conflict of interest. So during the question period, he recused himself and left the room. And so when we get to making an actual motion and second and voting on it, Director Akbari is not present for this.
I would add to that in looking, I believe you had a chance to glance at the drawing that Director Sethy had asked for, which shows the layout and the streets and houses, and it was clear then, and only then, that this was near his house, his parents' home.
Correct.
So thank you. So, motion, please.
I'll go ahead and move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Huang?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
And Weed?
Aye. Wait, Director Akbari back. We'll next move into reports. We have the board committee reports, which are a total of 5. Is there any comment or question on the board committee reports?
Do we have a staff presentation for financial impacts?
Yes, that's further down the agenda.
Okay. I see. Thank you.
That would be item 6.3.2.
Oh, thank you.
2.1 currently.
Yeah. My apologies.
We have none on the committee reports and move on to 6.2, which is the operational reports. Rainfall, water production, quarterly oil levels, quarterly project review, and investments, as well as quarterly budget report, quarterly personnel report, and distribution system monthly hardness map. Do you have any comments or anything to highlight?
No, staff did not have any specific areas to highlight. Typically, we like to highlight a project in the quarterly projects review, but we felt we did that already.
Thank you. Move on to the staff presentations. We've had one. Next is the 6.3.2 financial impacts to the district resulting from recent statewide legal case findings.
Thank you, President Weed. And this item will be presented by our Human Resources Manager, Jennifer Rogers.
Can I ask how long this presentation is?
I can try to make it real fast. Do we need a break?
I was thinking if we could take just a 5-minute break or something.
Sure.
Would that be appropriate, or you want to
brief? And we'll
No, we don't want any of the directors feeling under undue stress. So, how about?
I'm not under undue stress.
Okay, any of the directors. 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it's a very short one. We'll be here back on at 8 o'clock. Thank you. Time now is open session. Not too bad. 8:04. And continue with our presentation on financial impacts to the district.
Thank you. I'll make this a very exciting presentation on recent legal and CalPERS discrimination, which has a financial impact on the district.
I think they might be excited, but in a negative way about that.
So tonight I'm going to talk briefly, if you have questions, interrupt me at any time, on 2 recent sort of adjustments or changes in legal cases in CalPERS. One is known as the Flores versus City of San Gabriel legal case, which we call the Flores case. And the second is a change in a PERSability, or what is considered reportable compensation to CalPERS related to one of our premiums that is offered under our MOU, the shift change operator premium. So on the Flores case, the crux of this issue is whether or not cash payments that are made as part of your medical or cafeteria plan get included in your overtime rate of pay or not. In short, the City of San Gabriel provides a flexible cafeteria plan similar to the district's, where we pay a flat dollar value to each employee with which they purchase medical, dental, vision, and other benefits with. They also provide a dollar cash compensation, similar to the district, for employees that decline medical coverage, which we refer to as dual health coverage or cash in lieu benefit. So the issues at hand were that the cash in lieu payments that the City of San Gabriel were providing were very large. They averaged $1,000 to $1,300 per month, and this was back in like 2009, 2012. So their Flores filed a suit, which is a police officer, against the City of San Gabriel, arguing that those dollars, that cash he received, was compensation and should be factored into his overtime rate, for FLSA overtime rate. And what it came down to in the court case was really how substantial those dollars were, and if they were considered incidental or incremental amount of cash, or if they were really high enough of a percentage of this person's compensation to be considered compensation and thus factored into the FLSA overtime rate. And as you see, the Ninth Court said, yes, it is. Question, sir.
Yes. For the benefit of the board, can you just quickly define what FLSA is?
Fair Labor Standards Act. And actually, in this slide, I'll talk about the different types of overtime. So this applies to the district. We have two different types of overtime. One is what we call contractual overtime, or overtime that's provided in our MOU, Memorandums of Understanding with the unions. And this is any work or pay status hours over 40 in a work week. So this would include the hours you work as well as sick leave or vacation. If you have pay status hours over 40 hours in a work week, you receive contractual overtime. The FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, overtime is only paid on actual work hours. So hours actually worked in excess of 40 in a week, not including sick and vacation. So the Flores case applies only to FLSA overtime. So for the district's case, there's no change in how we implement, calculate, report contractual overtime. But for our FLSA overtime, when our employees actually work more than 40 hours in a work week, we now have to include those cash payments, the cash in lieu of benefits, as well as the flex dollars that folks receive out of the cafeteria medical plan into the overtime calculations. Those are included in their regular rate of pay under FLSA definitions. So that inclusion of those cash dollars is new. That's a change. Those were not previously included prior to Flores. Again, the amendment is to include the cash in lieu and flex dollars into the calculations. That was the only change. We were already compliant with the rest of our regular rate of pay calculations. And the legal liability was to go back 3 years from the date that the district became aware of the issue. So we became aware of the Flores case in August of 2013 when the original court decision was made. There was then a period of time where it went to an appeal. So we waited taking action until the appeal was heard. And then the case was upheld in the fall of 2016. So our back pay obligation was back to August of 2013, 3 years from when we became aware of the issue. So in implementing Flores in the fall after the appeal and the decision was upheld, we began the analysis. This had a significant impact on the finance department and doing these calculations, and a lot of support from legal and understanding the calculations, embedding them, and making sure that we were doing this right. It also involved some system programming in our payroll system, and then manual calculations in the back pay. And what that involved for finance staff was going through and looking at everyone that had FLSA overtime, not just overtime, and then applying those cash dollars to the overtime rate. So starting in August 2017 forward, our calculations are updated and we are compliant. And then in October, we went through the procedure with the unions to reach the back pay and inform them of the changes. So this included notifying the employee unions as there was an offer to meet and confer over the impacts. And then individual notices were sent to each employee to explain to them the issue and then what their calculation was, their amount of back pay. So it impacted 116 active employees and then 13 employees that are no longer active that have left employment but were in that 3 to 4 year window that we had to calculate the back pay on. And the total back pay that was paid out in October is about $42,090. The financial impact this fiscal year, or last 16-17, is approximately $11,000. So we'll be able to partially mitigate these cost increases in the future related to overtime, as these are a function of FLSA overtime, and then the healthcare premiums. So it's something that we'll have to see what the impact is this year and next year based on what our premiums are and our overtime rates. So that's all I have on the Flores. Is there any questions about that piece before I change to the shift change? Good.
Actually, I have a curiosity question. Yeah. So in one of your slides on implementing Flores, you say number of employees impacted is 116 active. We actually have that many employees that's taking advantage of the cash in lieu of health benefit option?
This actually applies to all employees because it's not only the cash in lieu, but also the flex dollars. So anyone that receives active medical under our cafeteria plan, unless they're in the highest cost plan, which currently no employees are,
I see, they got the rebate.
get the cash back. So
Okay.
both of those buckets
Okay,
of
I
cash
see.
get included. So it's
Okay.
essentially any union employee that had FLSA overtime in the last 4 years
Okay.
was impacted by this.
Thank you.
So the shift change operator, we have what we call a shift change operator premium in our MOU with the treatment plant operators and treatment facility operators. Provides a 7.5% premium for them being basically flexible in their shift. So like the relief operator, if somebody calls in sick or is on vacation, then they shift their schedule around to provide that coverage, and as such they receive that premium. And the premium's not new. It's been in the last several MOUs, predates my experience here, but we changed the name of the premium in the most recent MOU that was adopted in July of 2016. And the operator submitted a request to CalPERS for a decision on the PERSability, basically, of that, of if that premium is reportable compensation or not. In the past, CalPERS had made the decision that it was not reportable compensation, but we provided them significant data in our new MOUs, and they have since now reversed that decision and said it is reportable compensation. So we went back to July 2016 from when the premium was most recently adopted by the board or readopted, and calculated back pay on that, and then again, similar to Flores, there's a chunk of back pay and then some obligation going forward. Similar process, notified the union, offered to meet and confer, and then letters to each of the individual employees. There were 9 employees impacted by this change. About $3,000 was paid in back pay, or $3,000, I'm sorry, was owed by the employees. The district's contribution was about $9,000, and we estimate our ongoing impact will be $4,500. And the difference in this, why there's an employee and a district contribution, is anything that is PERSable compensation, the employee pays a portion of as well. So in this case, the impacted employees owed some for having that as be reportable compensation and pensionable for them. And that's it. Any questions? Still awake?
So just a clarification on the CalPERS. So that was basically employees themselves lobbying CalPERS for a reversal. That's what occurred there. And both of these issues are non-discretionary. So, staff has been working hard to deal with addressing the issues, but we felt that because essentially what the district is doing is writing checks to employees that are above and beyond the compensation schedule, that we should make sort of a formal notification to the board of this and what it means.
So question is, being PERSable, this also means that you would be included in calculating the retirement benefits, correct?
Correct.
So the impact is not just ongoing annual, is for perpetuity, since we pay the retirement benefit.
And that's why there's an employee contribution and a district,
Right.
because they're paying for that, like
Yeah.
all other PERSable
Right, and
compensation.
we pay our share too, so we do have a responsibility.
Yeah, but I don't know if the employees realized exactly when they were lobbying CalPERS for this that they were themselves going to have to write some checks for their portion of the CalPERS premium, and essentially that's what they're doing, or receiving deduction in their payroll.
Yeah, we did it through 2 payroll deductions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. The ratio of that is about 4 to 1, is it not, the district bank game?
Oh, in this case, yeah,
So the employees would be paying maybe 20% of the total.
correct.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then we move on to the General Manager's Report, 6.4.
Yes, I have just one item for the board this evening. I wanted to inform the board that our Community Affairs staff, you know her as Shireen Gonzalez, became even more popular in the community over the past several months. The reason was the first Lego League So basically, First Lego League is an international event with over 255,000 participants, 32,000 teams, 32,000 robots, I'll get into that in a moment, 1,464 events in 88 countries. 96 teams are from Fremont, 1 from Newark. So this year's topic is hydrodynamics, and the First Lego League participants are to research a real-world problem related to, and I quote, the human water cycle, how people find, transport, use, and dispose of water, and develop a solution. They also must design, build, program a robot using Lego Mindstorms, then compete on a tabletop playing field. So since September, the district has received nearly 50 requests and provided tours of our water treatment facility to nearly 200 Fremont and Newark students in grades 4 through 8 who are participating in the Lego League Challenge. So I guess the positive is the district's guided tours of our water treatment processes will help local teams have a better understanding of water resources and treatment. We are pleased to have served as a resource for these young children out there to win a competition, and wish competing teams the best of luck. Qualified events are scheduled for mid-November, and I hope the board doesn't have any questions because that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Can they take a crack at our fish ladder, maybe?
Although I am familiar with the Lego Mindstorm robot, they are pretty amazing. And my daughter participated in a sort of a class for pre-adolescent girls at Santa Clara College a number of years ago. It was pretty interesting.
If they could build a fish cannon, that'd be great.
So that's it for GM reports.
Actually, Mr. Shaver, if you don't mind just 1 second, I just want to add to the response that I provided earlier in terms of the cost of the rubber dam facilities and ladders and so forth. Just want to make sure we got it all out there. As of 2016, the cost estimates were going forward for ACWD about $9 million more for rubber dam 1 fish ladder. That's ACWD's share. So I didn't want to mislead the board and suggest that the total cost of that facility would only be $9 or $10 million. So
when you say more, what would the total?
So that's the to-go cost for ACWD for the rubber dam number 1 Bart Weir fish ladder facility.
A total of $9 million?
Was about $9 million as of 2016, and part of the scope of work, as I mentioned, for GHD is to update those estimates. So I didn't want to mislead the board and suggest that that's the total cost of the facility. So thank you for obliging me with that additional information.
Hopefully we'll put a camera in there to count the fish, and then we can figure out how much it costs per fish. Next, then, we move on then to director's comments and reports of meetings attended and agenda item requests. 7.1 is Director Sethy, who attended the South Bay Engineers meeting.
You want to start at the end of the board, or should I?
Well, I think we're
here?
going down our agenda.
Yeah.
So you're the first
Okay.
one on the agenda.
All right, so at the South Bay Engineers Club meeting last month, this month as well, they were both very pertinent to our water agency. Last month's presentation was on corrosion control for large diameter water and wastewater pipelines, which directly tied in with this 36-inch main that we were just talking about because of the welding around the pipe and everything. The presenter was really talented gentleman. He's worked for the last 27 years for SFPUC. He's the lead corrosion designer for San Francisco PUC, and is a certified cathodic protection specialist, educator, and chairman of the National Association of Corrosion Engineers. So we had a number of our staff there for the presentation. It was extremely interesting to go through histories, visuals, pictorials of lifetime experiences on pipelines, particularly in San Francisco, where they're aging out and where they're doing upgrades. very relevant to our district because of how they were showing the same timeline, the curve of life expectancy, when you can expect problems in your pipeline systems, both for steel and for concrete asbestos pipelines. So I learned a lot there. I think our staff learned as much or more, and probably will be applying that into their work here. But really a fascinating education on all of these issues that are very timely for us. I mean, we're currently having to deal with all those on our main replacement program. Can I cover a couple of other issues real quick?
Let's see, we're going to go down the report.
Or you want to come back to me?
We can we'll go through all of the reports,
Okay,
and then we
come
can
back
have
to
a
me.
general
Yeah.
session.
All right.
The next item is myself, which is a report on the Association of California Water Agencies Regulatory Summit in Sacramento, October 17th. That was related to the water loss legislation, AB 555. The Department of Water Resources is in the process of preparing the regulations to implement that legislation. Ironic, some of the same faces that were involved in AB 401 with this meeting representing DWR. I found it remarkable that different levels of understanding of how the system worked, particularly some people at some fairly large agencies. We had LA Water and Power that came down and proudly stated that they had 98% accuracy on their meters, but pointed out that they cannot measure the low flows because they were using standard meters as opposed to ultrasonic, and were missing 5 to 8% of the low flow, which is the leaks. And that of the over 10% leaks we have in the system, I don't believe it was not understood by the legislature that the majority of those leaks are probably on the customer side of the meter, and that the standard meters we use do not detect those leaks. East Bay Mud reconfirmed that. They did their own bench studies and said 4 to 7% of the low water flow was not being detected on their meters. And I was just made to learn that they were still going ahead with an AMI system using that type of meter that cannot detect leaks. They have 2 AMI systems in the planning stages at this time. There is a national water leak conference on the first few days in December in San Diego, immediately following the Aqua conference in Anaheim, and this will be in San Diego. They said the first one last year in Atlanta had 500 participants. They're expecting over 1,000 participants in the upcoming meeting, because it has now become the latest target for water conservation, feeling that that's a cost-effective means of doing it if you get the right meter. So, going ahead and moving. So that was that meeting. The item 7.3 is a report for myself for the October 26th Water Education Foundation Water Leaders Program in Sacramento. Their presentation had Grant Davis as a speaker. Mark Cowan was also there and both addressed the group on the water policies. They went through the history of Water Education Foundation. We have at least 3 water education fellows, and they had a reception for them earlier. Leonard Ash, Leda Higgs, and now Marta...
Laura Heides.
Laura Heides.
And Sarah Mata, who is in the current program.
Okay.
So we have 3.
And then Leonard Ash is a graduate of that program.
Correct.
An excellent program. They were taking a wide number of ages involved in this. It's an extraordinary program to get involved with. Earlier that day, I had hoped to get up for the Pacific Planning Institute's meeting on water, where they had some excellent speakers. I watched it for the first time on the webcast, and it's amazing how you get an extra couple hours sleep when you can watch a webcast. It's in Sacramento, and it was an excellent presentation on general water policy in California. Those are my 3 reports. Now we have an opportunity for members of the board to address items that are not on our agenda.
Nothing from me.
Actually, I think this was a committee report. I'm not sure if, I don't believe we've identified this yet, that in the status of the 2015 urban water management plans that we were cited. Has that been directed to the board yet, Bob? Page 147.
Current meeting minutes, I believe.
It's in the meeting minutes only,
Yeah.
but I'd like to call it out that, for our staff. I think that's should be complimented.
Yeah, essentially, the Department of Water Resources used ACWD's urban water management plan as an example of how an urban water management plan should be prepared, which was very nice for to hear. We know we have talented staff at ACWD, but it's really nice when it gets recognized statewide.
It's on page 147, by the way, of the packet tonight.
And we were the only agency called out
Yeah.
in the entire state.
Under demand forecasting.
Nothing really from my end. I just wanted to say I was a little bit disappointed. I thought in the general manager's report we would hear about ACWD's wonderful Halloween costumes. But, I was hoping for some pictures, but I guess we'll wait until next week for that.
What happens at the ACWD Halloween Employees Association celebration stays at the ACWD Halloween celebration. Have a nice day.
Yeah, okay, I have a few items here. Yesterday, Director Weed and I attended the Alameda County Special Districts Association meeting up in Oakland. The meeting was held at Stop Waste, so it was a good opportunity to be at their headquarters again, since they're a partner agency with us on so many efforts. And we had a presentation from AC Transit, whose headquarters are right behind them. They're building a bus Stop Waste. And we also had a presentation from Stop Waste on all of their current programs and initiatives, and lots of interesting things that not only tie in with water, but wastewater, USD efforts as well. So without going into a lot of detail about the meeting, I'll let John highlight some things from there. I wanted to provide this report that was passed around on measured WW expenditures by agency from around the county. And what I took note of was that the city of Fremont, from their measured WW funds, spent $735,000, I'm rounding off numbers here, on citywide well rehabilitation. $735,000. That's quite a bit of money in order to save money on their water usage. They also spent $575,000 on irrigation controller replacement, and those are completed projects, and then they've approved another $344,000 for further irrigation controller replacements and radio antenna installations. So that's a total of about $1.7 million out of their measured WW funding that they're spending on water resources. If you take a further look here, Newark spent 0 and Union City spent 0. So what I would like to do, as we were talking about this, is I think there's an opportunity for ACWD to reach out to Newark and Union City. Not that we want to put them on the spot with what Fremont has done, but I think there's an opportunity to encourage them to take a look at what the potential cost savings are, from putting in additional wells, rehabilitating wells, doing irrigation replacements, enhancements. And we might have to put together a little business case, you know, for each of them. And we certainly need to reach out to our school districts as well. When we were going through the rate increase, schools were complaining and very bitter about our rate increase, but they don't seem to understand the benefit of putting in the wells and that they can take advantage of the agricultural rate, which is a tiny fraction.
I don't believe the school district can.
But they can.
Well, actually,
It's for all parks.
municipal recreation.
And municipal recreation, right?
Unless they can extend it to
Football
municipal
fields.
recreation. If they have a municipal
Playgrounds.
recreation on that grounds.
Yeah.
So the school district would have to let the city on their turf.
So, what I heard a request for is for staff to look at opportunities to help Newark, Union City, and potentially the schools to conserve as well as save money, and we're happy to do that. If you want additional conversation on this item, then I would suggest we should agendize it.
I would prefer not to.
Okay, so we will, message received. Thank you.
Maybe you can inform us at the Water Resources Committee as to whether schools can take advantage of.
Well, we can answer a quick question. So, Mr. Rinn, the Muni Recreation and Ag rate?
So the Replenishment Assessment Act is very specific on who can receive the agricultural rate and the municipal recreational rate, and the property has to be owned and operated by the city. So that's really the key. Coincidentally, we were contacted today, in fact, by the Newark Unified School District, and so we're setting up future conversations with them regarding putting in wells for some of their school sites.
So the schools, even though the replenishment rate that applies to the city of $8 an acre foot, they would still benefit by putting in wells because they would be receiving water charged at the Replenishment Act rate, which is closer to around $400, right?
Correct.
So there's still a substantial savings for them.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of them are thinking creatively too, as many of the parks butt up against school parks, and so they're looking at opportunities to share resources.
Okay.
So we will, we received the feedback and we'll begin having conversations. We'll bring it back to committee.
Yeah. Maybe next time you meet with Fremont's, or talk to Fremont's city manager, I would compliment them from our board on what they've done. Number two, I wanted to bring up an issue that came to my attention last week when I went through the H.R. 1, which is the tax bill that was submitted in the House of Representatives. And there are a lot of interesting aspects of that tax bill, to say the least. But what I was focused on as I was reading through materials and read through the act, it's 429 pages, is what's on pages 255 and 265 and 266. 265 and 266. It's section 3600 of the tax bill. And what Congress is proposing to do here, I think, should cause a little bit of alarm here at our agency, and I believe that we need to take some kind of action. The Republicans in Congress are proposing to repeal all state and local advance refunding of bond issues. So, for state and local governments that have issued bonds, let's say at a 6% rate, I'm just giving you an example here, and interest rates are now at 3%, and we go through a refunding, those refundings are repealed under this act. You would not be allowed to go through any refundings at all. ACWD over the last 10 years did 2 major refundings in which we saved our ratepayers over $4 million on the first one and millions of dollars more on the second one. And so I brought this to the attention of our general manager, our council, President Weed, and I've been going through further materials throughout the week on this, and I brought it up at the Special Districts Association meeting yesterday. You might ask yourself, what are the Republicans trying to accomplish here? Is there any additional revenue that the government is receiving? And the answer is no. Are there any cost savings to the government? And the answer is no. If you read further into some of the business commentaries, what you'll discover is that the Republicans are trying to protect the top 1% of 1% here, so that people that have invested in bonds, municipal, local, state, where they were earning a higher rate of return and expecting that for, let's say, 30 years, those refundings can no longer happen to shorten the period in which they were gaining that higher interest rate. So we know on our bond fundings, like Rothschild and others that invested in ACWD, they're expecting a certain return over a period of time. And the bill is essentially repealing all advance refundings to protect that very class of investors, which I found atrocious. So I'm requesting that what we should do is work through, we can't really work locally because all of our legislators are on the Democratic side, but I think we should reach out to ACWA, Federal Affairs Committee, CSDA, Legal or Legislative Affairs, and see if we can provide some input, some response. Are there any other board members that have some feedback or comment on the issue? I support your comments.
Okay. So we have agendized this specific issue for the next Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to work with the 2 directors on exactly what kind of message we can convey.
I'm on the Federal Affairs Committee of ACWA, and we meet again at the ACWA conference at the end of the month.
So,
So I guess I might add some comments, and that is the Government Finance Officers Association, of which some of the staff here, including myself, are members, is actively advocating against some of these provisions that would be harmful to state and local governments, and they are actively lobbying members of Congress. They've been working with Congress for months on this, and I think perhaps submitting comments through GFOA might be one way to go about trying to have our voice heard as the Alameda County Water District.
And what I'm thinking is that we can work with the committee members to draft the kind of comments that we would be submitting, and then President Weed, who's involved in the Federal Affairs Committee in ACWA, will be equipped to convey ACWD's concerns, see if we can get any traction in ACWA as a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And then, depending on how that goes, there's CSDA as well.
Right. So the CSDA legislative rep was in our meeting yesterday, and I also promised her that I would forward some documents to 2 other people in CSDA, Neil McCormick and one other individual. So,
okay.
And you know, it's surprising, as I've been talking to people over the last week, almost no one is aware of this being inserted in the tax bill. It's really gone over past people. So I think to the extent we can lead the charge a little bit here, it might be helpful. So two other things real quick. I would like to make a request, perhaps to the Water Resources Committee, if not for a presentation to the entire board, because I think it's relevant now that we're moving forward with the fish ladders, and we see what San Francisco's doing in the upper Alameda Creek area. I would think it would be timely if we had a presentation on all of the remaining fish barriers that are in the Alameda Creek, from Niles moving all the way back into Sunol, so that we have some idea of what other issues we might have to deal with down the road, where investments might have to be made.
If I may, if we can do this, say this calendar year, while you and Director Gunther are on the Water Resources Committee, it might be a good place to do that, and then we'd include those materials with the board packet.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and the last thing I want to mention is I went on a week of vacation to Southern Oregon, Crater Lake, after the last board meeting I mentioned. Had a great time, but I also visited 3 fish hatcheries. No reimbursement from the district. This was on my own time, but I went first to the Cole M. Rivers Fish Hatchery, which is the second largest in Oregon, on the Rogue River, in just an absolutely spectacular view of nature. It's just really extraordinary. And that is focused on Chinook salmon, and really just an extremely interesting place. I wasn't planning on visiting it. I noted it on the map as I was driving along the highway, and then said, no way, I'm going to stop in and see this place. I did make plans ahead of time to stop at the Klamath Falls Fish Hatchery, which is trout-based, and I had called ahead to the supervisor, that general manager that runs that facility, and that was really enjoyable. They raise about 1.5 million fish at that facility. It's the 4th largest in Oregon, and 300,000 fish a year alone go into Small Diamond Lake, north of Crater Lake, for recreational fishing. They say you can catch as much fish as you want, trout as you want, in Diamond Lake. And when I came down to Redding, 10 miles south in Anderson, about 10 miles off of Highway 5, is what I was told is the largest fish hatchery in the United States. It's the Coleman National Fish Hatchery. There happened to be about 1,000 students there that day, and is absolutely worthwhile visiting. It's in this beautiful park setting. It's been there for since the 30s or something, 20s. And when I said I'm with a water district, they gave me like the private tour, and I had really a really good time there. And it was just 4 or 5 days into Chinook salmon coming upstream from the Sacramento River into Battle Creek all the way up into the fish hatchery, and I got to see that live. And of course they were killing some of the females and taking eggs out and inseminating those. But they 5,000 eggs per female, and they had a digital counter on top as they were processing the fish. And just to enjoy the history there, and the fellow that gave me the guided tour had worked there for 35 years for almost his entire career, and was now a docent for another dozen years on top of that. So if you ever have a chance to see one of these fish hatcheries, it's just a real joy. I keep joking with Director Weed that someday we're going to have one in Sunol.
Thank you. Well, I've referred a book to the members of the board and staff called An Entirely Synthetic Fish, which is the trout, which includes the steelhead, and pointing out that there's no genetic identity left among the vast majority of the fish since they have been fish farmed through hatcheries. And they're plentiful where you wish to find them, with or without having water-wasting fish ladders. So, that being my comment, we can then go on into, we have a closed session, but I don't believe we need a closed session tonight.
No, closed session is not needed.
All right. Then, is there any other item or business before the board? There being none, do we have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. We are adjourned.